Maggie Draper was born on July 15, 1864, in Richmond, Virginia. Her mother, Elizabeth, was a former slave and assistant cook for Elizabeth Van Lew, an abolitionist of that time. Maggie's father, Ulysses, was an Irish-American who met the mother on the Van Lew estate. The two never married, and Maggie ended up being born on the Van Lew property. After Maggie was born, the mom married a butler of the estate named William Mitchell. In 1870, Mitchell had a kid, which would be Maggie's half-brother Johnny, who is 3 years younger than her. Maggie's stepdad got a job head waiting at St. Charles Hotel in Richmond, Virginia, so they were able to get a small house of their own. But then tragedy struck the family. In 1876, William was found drowned in a river. The death would be ruled suicide, but Elizabeth thought murder was involved. This event sent the family into poverty, which made the mom open a laundry business where Maggie would help deliver laundry to the white patrons. This is when she began to notice segregation and quality of life between blacks and whites were completely different. Maggie attended Lancaster School and later Richmond Colored Normal School, both dedicated to the education of African Americans. While attending, she joined the Independent Order of St. Luke, a fraternal organization dedicated to advancement of African Americans for both financial and social standing. In 1883, Maggie graduates and becomes a teacher. Maggie returned to Lancaster School to teach, and in 1886 she was forced to leave her job because she married a man named Armstead Walker, Jr., who was a brick contractor. She left the school because the school had a policy against married teachers, so if you got married, you were forced to leave your job. So now she was balancing her marriage and work for the next several years. In 1890, she gave birth to her firstborn son, Russell, and in 1893, she gave birth to a baby that died at infancy. And in 1895, Maggie became Grand Deputy Matron through the ranks of the order and also established a youth arm of the order to inspire social consciousness in young African Americans. Then in 1897, she had her son, Melvin. In 1899, Maggie became the Order of St. Luke's Grand Secretary, and during this time the bank was on the verge of bankruptcy. In 1901, Maggie gave a speech where she outlined her plans to save it, and through the next several years she did just that. In 1902, Maggie founded the St. Luke Herald to carry news of the order to local chapters as it helped with educational work. In 1903, Maggie opened St. Luke's Penny Savings Bank and remained president here until 1929. In 1905, she opened St. Luke's Emporium, a department store that offered African American women work opportunities, plus gave the black communities access to cheaper goods. In 1915, tragedy would strike the family again when her husband died. In 1915, Maggie's husband was coming home late from work one night, and Russell, their son, mistook him for an intruder and ended up shooting and killing him. Russell was tried for the murder but was found innocent. Maggie also developed diabetes during this time. In 1921, Maggie ran for seat of Superintendent of Public Instruction on a Republican ticket but was defeated by the other candidates. In 1924, Maggie's bank served a membership of more than 50,000 people in 1,500 local chapters. She kept the bank alive until the Great Depression, when she merged the bank with two others in 1929 to save it from going under. During the last few years of Maggie's life, she was confined to a wheelchair and continued to suffer with diabetes. On December 15, 1934, at age 70, she died from diabetic complications. She was buried in Evergreen Cemetery in Richmond, Virginia. However, Maggie's legacy will continue to live on as she impacted many individuals, communities, and society as a whole. In 1979, Maggie's home on East Lee Street in the Jackson Ward neighborhood of Richmond, Virginia, which is also known as the Harlem of the South, was purchased by the National Park Service and became a historical site that can still be visited by many people today. Maggie Walker was not only the first woman to become president of a bank in the United States, but also the first African American woman to become president of a bank as well. She broke traditional and discriminatory laws that opened more job opportunities for women and women of color. This was an extraordinary feat during her time because women couldn't even vote during this time period. And it also opened a way for the civil rights movement that would come later in history, abolishing segregations in jobs, schools, residences, public transportation, and so on. Not only that, but Maggie also gave the black communities around her more access to cheaper goods and financial stability despite the segregation laws in that era. She was also a major contributor and advocator to the industrial home for wayward girls in her community. She gave individuals motivation and inspiration because she broke social, economic, and political barriers in life for business ventures. She encouraged investing in activism for women and women of color against discrimination and segregation, and she was also a supporter in the anti-lynching movements. Maggie opened lots of doorways for the civil rights movement and women equality. She was definitely underlooked and undervalued, and she is a key part to our history and should remain to be remembered throughout history for what she's accomplished. Maggie never gave up hope. She always believed that no matter what your race was or gender, you should be able to have any type of job you want and build a successful career, as well as not having to deal with segregation and prejudices just because of the color of your skin. She believed in equality for all human beings to strive at their best possible abilities. When it comes to her children, Russell Walker was never the same after ending up accidentally killing his father. After the trial, he mainly spiraled in depression and died 8 years later in 1923 at the age of 33. He was buried in the same place that his mother was. Melvin Walker became a bookkeeper and married Ethel R. Robinson and later died of pneumonia. He was buried January 3, 1935 at 38 years old in the same place that his mother was.